Welcome. Very pleased to see you here. We're going to be talking today, as I said, about being defensive.
Yes.
And how to manage people whose first approach when you tackle anything is to be defensive.
Yeah, to get prickly and to answer questions that you haven't even really asked them because they've got a conversation going on in their head.
And I think there are a number of issues that I think would be worth looking at. But I think it's very important that we look at not only how to deal with people who are being defensive to you,
yes,
but actually to look at why sometimes we are very defensive in the first instance when other people are talking to us.
Yes.
Because it's very easy to point the finger at other people and not
Yes.
recognise the behaviours that are going on.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a couple of conversations I've had this week with people where I've asked a question and there has been no edge to the question. I simply wanted to know a piece of information.
Yes.
The other person on the receiving end of the question has immediately assumed that I was criticising them for doing something wrong.
Yes.
Or not doing something, when actually nothing was further from the truth. It was a question about technology. Those of the people that know me know that technology and I have a very interesting relationship. And my assumption with everybody is that they're going to know more than me around technology. So I was asking a question about something on my system. They assumed that I was criticising them for not having done something.
Right.
I wouldn't have known whether they'd done it or not. I simply wanted to know what I was looking at on the screen and what that meant.
Yes. And it's very easy in that scenario, isn't it, to sort of be listening to this person getting defensive and actually the conversation in your own head to be, hang on, I was just asking a question. Why am I in trouble? And then you're beginning to get defensive about it.
And so things escalate. So what it starts off with a very simple question ends up being an argument. Now, I do think it's really important that we point out that you have to be very honest with yourself.
Yes.
It's so easy to create a pointed question and then say, but I was only asking a question.
Yes.
So this is about, you have to be honest with yourself. There's no good blaming other people for being defensive if actually you're playing a game.
Yeah.
Now, one of the problems, I think, for everybody in this situation is that we do things habitually. We've talked about this a lot in the programme, that we do things habitually, and as a result, we don't recognise the behaviours that we're doing.
Yeah.
They become an unconscious reaction to somebody else.
Yeah.
And so we're not really aware, not only of what we're doing, but also how that lands on the other person.
Yeah, and let's face it, I mean, the habit to be defensive can start very early, because I know when I'm dealing with my children, if something has happened or there is something in the house and I say, oh, well, who's done this? Just to sort of...
Not me, Garth. It wasn't me.
Yeah, and immediately the children jump to a defensive position. Immediately, it's like almost lizard brain. Deny it, defend it, and I often have to have conversations with them saying, look, I'm not going to get angry. I just want to know who did or why this happened or whatever. Could you just be honest with me? Nobody's going to get into trouble.
Yes. And in fact, when I was at school, those of you that listened to our programs before know that I was the head teacher or principal of a large school for over 20 years, that I would say to children that actually there's more likelihood of you getting into trouble for lying than there is for telling the truth.
Yes.
But it's interesting how often children, and I don't think it's that different with adults, how often children back themselves into a corner and almost convince themselves that they haven't done something or they have done something they should have done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they, even though you may have seen something happening, that you actually start to think, did I see it? Were my eyes or my ears tricking me? So let's get back to adults.
Yep.
You have a situation where you are being, you need a piece of information or you want to talk to somebody, and that person's immediate response is to be defensive. And I think there's a number of things that it's worth thinking about. And I think that's the key, to think about it, and rather than things happening automatically.
Mm.
And the first is, consider how you're going to present what you're saying to people. The voice that you use, the body language that you use will have an enormous impact on how it lands on that other person.
Mm.
And I think the difficulty is, if you're irritated, use my example of technology, I was already very irritated about the technology. So when I thought about it later, what I wasn't sure was, did that irritation come through in my voice and my demeanour, which wasn't with the other person, but was with the technology, and the fact that the technology wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And how often do we translate that energy, that negative vibe, and we don't even know we're doing it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is it the other person is under pressure, and actually you caught them at a bad moment, or you know, there's other things going on in their life that you have no idea about.
Yeah.
And so this is just the last straw. So their immediate response, again, their unmindful response, their habitual response, is to bite back.
Yes.
And of course that becomes a habit.
Yes. And there's this phrase, isn't it, especially in sport, that the best form of attack is defence.
Yeah.
Or is it the other way around, actually? I can't remember.
No, it's the best form of defence is attack.
Right. But that is at least, and my confusion proves it, that defence and attack are very, very similar.
Yes.
That it can be very difficult to spot it. Somebody thinks that they are defending something, and it is interpreted as an attack by the other person.
Absolutely.
Who also thinks they are defending something.
Yeah. And interestingly, very often, neither people actually have the stance of needing to be right or wrong.
No.
There is this sense that, you know, if I am doing this, that puts me in the wrong, therefore I want to defend myself.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I need this response for you in order for me to feel right. But often it's not right or wrong. It's about information, or it's about interpretation. Interpretation of motive, which I think is one of the things we've talked about before, how quickly we assume motive from other people, which may or may not be true.
Yeah.
But the challenge of that is, once we assume something, it becomes our reality.
Yes.
And so we then behave in a way that follows that reality through.
Yes, I mean, this is all linked, isn't it, to if you are defensive, then you are by your nature trying to protect something.
Yeah.
What are you trying to protect? What is it that you are anxious or fearful about happening? And it all tracks back down to a particular fear or anxiety that something awful is going to happen if you aren't successful in your defence.
I think that's very true. And I believe, I may be wrong, but my belief is that if you are somebody who feels secure in your own skin, good about yourself, then you also recognise that you aren't perfect, and yet you are. You are a perfect human being, but you have frailties and you have faults, and you at times will get it wrong, sometimes very badly wrong.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that you are any less a person.
Yes.
What's interesting for me is that those people who have the confidence to put their hands up and say, look, if I've done something wrong, I'm really sorry, I'll do my best to put it right.
Yeah.
Rather than, I've got to defend my position even when I'm in the wrong, because that will show that I'm strong and I can feel good about myself.
Yeah.
And of course it's nonsense, because actually in the act of defending something that you have said or done, or not said or done, that has had a negative impact on the other person, then that's what starts the negative voice in your head. Shouldn't have done that. Oh, you should have done that. You mustn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a great example of this last night when I'd worked really hard all day on a load of software testing, and then had to hand it over to my husband to carry on whilst I came and participated in your online questionnaire session. And when I got back home, hoping to hear that he'd completed it, the results weren't actually that great. And he had got quite stressed because of how everything had been recorded, how the requirements had been captured. And it wasn't quite how he was used to managing it himself, but because he's had to be hands off, somebody else had managed it, so he was dealing with all of this, unnecessary change, I guess he would say. And there was a moment where I stood behind him as he sat at the desk, sort of, going, look, this is wrong and this is wrong. And I thought, oh, I'm to blame then, am I? It's all my fault, is it? And these little voices started to go up in my head. I can't do anything right, can I? and I just thankfully was mindful enough just to go, okay, I'm beginning to feel a bit defensive about this. But, actually, that's not very helpful. It's really late. I think we're probably all very tired and on a short fuse. So giving into some, emotional defence is probably not going to be the best thing. So I'm just going to sit down by my computer, turn it on, just stay silent whilst he's talking to himself about this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and then just try to sort of work my way into, so should we look at that then? Well, that sentence there is written by that person, so that's got that context. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. No, obviously, no. Okay, so we can sort of, and slowly we worked our way into the job without having a big Barney. But if I had reacted to the voices that were in my head, my little habits, my little triggers of, you're a bad girl, you didn't do it right, you failed, you should just sort of give up and go away because you're annoying me now. If I had given into that little internal voice and become defensive externally, it would have been an argument. It definitely would have been an argument. I definitely avoided an argument last night.
And I think, with all of these things, it's about making a judgment, isn't it? That taking a step back, taking that moment to actually consider, are these voices actually, are they the appropriate voices in this situation?
Yes, yes.
There are times when you need to defend yourself, not quite to the death, but to stand your ground.
Yes, yes.
But those times are few and far between.
Yeah.
I think so much of the time they are misinterpretations of motive, misinterpretations of what's actually being said or being asked. And we make meaning of those words which are completely different to what's intended. And so my advice to people is, first of all, manage your own emotional state.
Yes.
So yesterday, it's interesting that both examples are around technology, manage your emotional state before you talk to other people, and recognize that what comes out of your mouth isn't how it lands, and that will land very differently on that other person depending on their emotional state. So some of this, I think, is about, before you go in bald-headed, actually taking a moment to recognize how the other person is, what they're doing, how their body language is. And if you start to tune into their energy, you can often tell this is not the time to do that.
Yeah.
But because of our habitual behaviour and our need to get in there and say it or do it quickly, get in first very often, we get the timing wrong. And in getting the timing wrong, something that starts off being, this big ends up being this big.
Yes.
And then you've got to retrieve it, and it takes much more time, much more energy.
Yes.
I'm not saying that you just let people get away with stuff. Please don't think that that's what I'm saying. But recognizing that when people, that you want something from people, or you want to say something about what's gone on, you will get a better result, a more satisfying result for you, and get actually a stronger relationship with other people if you manage yourself first, and if you consider where they are in the grand scheme of things.
There's a reason why in warfare there is such a thing as a tactical withdrawal.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it is the best form of warfare.
Well, you may actually, let that battle go, but you win the war, don't you?
Yes.
And, if you've got somebody who has a habitual pattern of defensive behaviour,
yes,
and there are those people, we know
yes,
several.
yes,
I think trying to deal with each individual situation is very difficult. But when there's no challenge going on, that's the time to sit down and say, look, I've thought about this a long time. I'd like to have a conversation with you using the very, very neutral voice that I'm using now, modelling it as we are sitting, okay, and say, I've noticed a pattern that whenever I bring something up, and my motive is not to attack, but just to understand or just to know, you immediately are incredibly defensive. And I'd just like to know what's going on. And then sit on your tongue and wait and allow the other person to speak.
Now, I've had conversations like that in my previous marriage, and no matter how I try to explain my perspective and my viewpoint on things and invite a similar reciprocation, it boiled down to an inability. It boiled down to I was asking too much of that person to do that. So sometimes when people are being defensive with you, it's not just about in the moment reacting in a habitual way because there's a specific fear. Sometimes it's about a complete mismatch of capability in terms of...
I think that's really interesting and very true. I think what I'm talking about is in the first instance.
Yes.
That you're never going to know whether this is a mismatch of a personality, a mismatch of values, whether it's something that the other person is completely incapable of doing unless you try, and not just once, but do it in different ways. If, however, over time, how long were you married to this guy?
Well, the relationship was about 20 years.
So, there will have come a time within that relationship where you would have recognised that you were hitting your head against a brick wall.
Yeah, and actually, I can date it because I wrote it down in my diary, and my, I'm not necessarily proud of the response, but I know it's a very human response to it, was that once I had realised that I was really not going to be able to move this person from their entrenchment by fair means or foul, and once I'd sort of really accepted that, then I was effectively absent from the relationship from that point onwards. And I stayed there another 8 years.
I think there's a number, in a program that's 30 minutes long, it's very difficult to unpick all of that. But I think there are a number of points that I'd like to make about that. Most relationships are less polarized than that relationship. And most relationships, if you work at understanding the other person and coming together, so long as they're prepared to meet you halfway, and they won't necessarily on the first time talk about it.
No.
And if you talk in one way and it doesn't work, then you've got to try lots of other ways. And I know that you did.
Yeah.
So it's important that the people who are involved in watching, listening to us today, recognise that this is not, you don't just try once and then let it go. But ultimately, to walk away from a relationship but know that you have tried every conceivable way to actually get a sense of a mutual understanding, I think is really important. On the other hand, I would also say that withdrawing can be a form of defence.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. I mean, the picture in my head was that he retreated behind his big wall of defence and his position, and I retreated behind mine, and we sat within our respective camps and carried on a so-called marriage for another 8 years.
Yeah.
But it's a stalemate. It's literally like two armies just sat on a battlefield, just threatening one another with the potential firepower, but never actually acting upon it.
But I do think it's important that people recognise that just because you're not verbally aggressive, there are some who would be physically aggressive. I don't believe there's any place for aggression in a relationship. No. However, passive aggressive means that you
Yeah.
can withdraw, and it's about a power thing.
Yeah.
And that can be just as defensive.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at the Cold War that went on for years and years and years. That was no more pleasant than
for some people, it's actually more toxic than actually having a row, clearing the air, and then being able to say, having done that, now let's find a way to carry on.
I would really agree with that from my own personal experience, because I know that his reality in those latter years was that because I wasn't interacting with him and challenging him quite as much, I'm pretty certain at times he thought that the relationship was better.
Yes.
Because he was comfortable behind his little ramparts.
Yes, I think, and this is very complex, and we're lumping all relationships together. Yeah. So this can be a significant other relationship, it can be a family relationship, friends, colleagues, or with your boss.
Yes.
And if you're a manager and you're a boss of people, I would suggest to you that one of the things that makes a lot of sense to develop is a culture where it's about development and not blame. So when something goes wrong, that people feel that they can actually say quickly, something's gone wrong, I take responsibility for it, I'm learning from it, let's put it right, rather than a culture where people are frightened to speak up and then try to hide it or blame somebody else in order to feel that they're not going to be attacked or that there's not going to be huge retribution. When I ran my organisation and I had 100 people working, or just under 100 people working for me, the whole culture was, we all make mistakes. However, you've got to learn from them. So if you're making the same mistake over and over, that's a very different thing. But in the first instance, if you've given it a good go and you've got a good rationale for having done it, fine. If you've made a human error simply because of you lost concentration or you just made an error of judgment, that too is a reasonable thing to do, so long as you don't put anybody else at risk, physically at risk. But you've got to learn from it. And so the collective learning then became much richer, because one person's learning because of something that hadn't gone right was then taken up by everybody.
And also the demonstration of that non-blame culture, the demonstration that it is okay to fail, to make that failure open, and to then search for the learning in it. If people see that in action, then they feel much more comfortable. Whereas it takes only just one example of somebody being punished for making an honest mistake, for everything to then be like, oh right, that's. So when they say, yes, we want you to take risks, they don't mean it. They don't mean it.
No.
And you get into that kind of lack of trust.
And it also depends on the industry, doesn't it? If you're a pilot, you want it where there is zero tolerance of not following procedure. That's a very different situation to somebody who is learning and growing in a situation where there is no risk to life. The tolerance that you have around mistakes is different. However, you look at the training that a pilot gets, they're not let loose in a plane with the public unless there is a real view that they are safe.
And it's interesting to compare the aviation industry versus the medical profession.
Very much so.
The aviation industry has, generally speaking, as far as I know, a culture of let's root out the problem, let's solve it, because if we don't, people will die. And they have a much more open culture for whistleblowers and all this sort of stuff going on. Whereas the medical profession, where people will still die when mistakes are made, certainly in the UK, and I can't imagine it's that much different, but certainly in the Western world, where doctors are faced with this awful dilemma of having to be perfect, to know how to save people, and yet stop being human and making errors. And so if they make an error, generally speaking, the biggest health scandal issues are caused by the fact that the the poor individuals in these scenarios felt that if they didn't cover it up or didn't behave in a certain way, then they would lose their job, and then they'd be, and not just lose their job, but be out of the career.
Really struggle.
Yeah.
And I think we're using very dramatic examples. Yeah. And I do think that the culture is down to the leadership, and the leadership both within the ward, the organisation, and collectively. Yes. And I think there's very long-lasting historical reasons for that.
Exactly.
I was very interested. I was on the National Patient Safety Agency national group, a non-exec director for 6 years. And when I first joined, I couldn't believe that in schools, if heads and schools don't do things right, then they're sacked. Doesn't happen in the health service. And I think, they're trying to change it, but it's really like trying to move a tank around.
Yes.
So let's take it back to the personal. I'm just checking the time, because I should have put my glasses on, but I can't see. We're getting very, very close to the end of our today's session. And I just want to bring it back to the personal to say to you, the next time you're in a situation where people are appearing to be defensive, just be mindful that you don't then go into your habitual behaviours and that you don't bite and in doing so make the situation worse. Yes. In the same way, if somebody comes and says something to you, asks you a question or challenges something you've done, think about being open to the possibility that actually a mistake has been made, but it's an honest one, and taking full responsibility for your actions, your words, or lack of them.
Yeah.
And, you can always say, if I've made a mistake, I'm really sorry, let's look at it together.
Yes.
That's not admitting fault. That's just being open to having a look.
Yeah.
Love to know what you think. Please let us know through the website, genuinely-you.com, if there are any themes, issues, questions that you have, and we can follow those up in future sessions. You can get a free digital download of Thriving, Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment, which is my latest book. And you can get that actually on the website, genuinely-you.com. There's also the opportunity to join the Thrive Together tribe, and there's a special deal where you can try it out for $1, no risk to you. Thank you so much for being part of today, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Take care now. Bye.
Use to end the meeting there. It'll then